The ballroom smelled like old money and fresh flowers, and the particular kind of ambition that never quite washes off. 300 of the most powerful people in the entire state stood beneath crystal chandeliers, holding crystal glasses, wearing suits that cost more than most people's monthly rent. The air hummed with the low, satisfied murmur of people who had never once in their lives worried about whether the lights would stay on. And then, without any warning at all, that hum stopped. Every conversation in that vast, glittering room died at the exact same moment. The way sound dies when something so unexpected happens that the human brain simply forgets, for one suspended second, how to keep making noise. 300 heads turned. 300 pairs of eyes followed the same small, certain figure moving alone across the polished ballroom floor. A little boy, 6 years old, walking in a perfectly straight line through a forest of expensive suits, past every powerful, polished, eligible man in the room, as though not one single one of them existed, walking toward the very back of the room, walking toward the service doors, walking toward a man in a rented suit who was holding a small plate of food he hadn't touched and quietly counting down the minutes until he could go home to his daughter. Nobody in that room could have predicted what came next. But before that little boy reached the end of that walk, you need to understand everything that made him take the first step. His name is Daniel Carr, 38 years old, school bus driver, Route 7, 6 years running. Not the kind of man who gets invited to galas. Not the kind of man who gets a second look in rooms like this one. Medium build, honest face. The kind of quiet steadiness that reads as invisible to people who have learned to only pay attention to power and money and noise. He has a daughter named Cora, age 8, who is, without any competition whatsoever, the single best thing that has ever happened to him. He took the bus route specifically for her. The hours line up exactly with school. He has never once missed a parent-teacher night, a school play, a bad dream, or a scraped knee. Her mother moved on when Cora was 3. It was the uncomplicated kind of ending. The kind with no villain, just two people who had grown into different directions and decided to stop pretending otherwise. Cora splits her time between them, and Daniel has made his peace with it. Even on the hard weeks when the house feels very quiet. He drives 41 kids to school every morning, and 41 kids home every afternoon. He knows every single face on that bus. He knows which ones didn't eat breakfast. He knows which ones are carrying things far too heavy for their small shoulders. 6 years of doing the same route twice a day teaches you to read a child the way other people read the weather, instantly, accurately, and without having to be told. About 14 months ago, a new name appeared on his manifest. Owen Calloway, age 6. The child who got on Daniel's bus that first gray Monday morning was, without question, the quietest child he had ever encountered in 6 years of driving. And Daniel understood immediately that this was not the quiet of a well-behaved child, or a shy one. This was something older and heavier than that. This was the quiet of a child who had learned, somewhere along the way, that the world was not entirely safe, and had drawn himself inward like a tide pulling back from the shore. He went straight to the third row, right side, hard against the window, and he watched the streets go past with those serious brown eyes, as though he was searching the passing world for something he already suspected, somewhere deep in his small chest. He was never going to find. Daniel learned the shape of Owen's story the way bus drivers always learn these things. Sideways, in pieces. A word from a teacher's aide here. A lowered voice between two parents at a bus stop there. Owen's father had died. An accident. When Owen was barely 4 years old. And Owen, who had apparently been a bright and talkative and laughing little boy before that day, had simply gone quiet in the aftermath. Almost completely silent. The doctors had a clinical name for it, but no clinical name in the world tells you what it actually looks like to watch a 6-year-old boy search passing streets through a bus window for a year and a half. His mother, Daniel gathered from the whispers, was someone very significant, a name people said with a particular weight behind it, a CEO, a woman of extraordinary wealth and influence. A woman who had every specialist and therapist that money could locate, working around the clock on her silent little boy. and none of it was working. Owen just kept watching out that window. Here is the thing that Daniel did, and it is honestly the only thing in this entire story that truly matters, so listen carefully. He did not try to fix Owen, because he could see, clearly and immediately, that everyone else in that child's life was already trying to fix him. The therapists, the tutors, the specialists, every well-meaning adult coming at that little boy, radiating the same desperate, hovering, anxious energy. Please be okay. Please say something. Please give us something to work with. And a child feels that. A child carries that energy like extra weight on top of the weight he is already carrying. Every single day, Owen was being quietly reminded by the behavior of every adult around him that he was a problem that needed solving. So Daniel simply did not do that. Every morning when Owen climbed up the steps, "Morning, Owen. Good to see you." That was it. No coaxing, no performing concern, no questions that required a performance of recovery in return. Just, "I see you. You exist. You are welcome here. Go find your seat." Every afternoon, there he is. Climb aboard, partner. And that was the entire sum of it, for months and months. Small things grew up out of that. Real things. The way real things always grow. Slowly. Without announcement. Daniel noticed what Owen noticed out of his window. And the one thing that made that solemn little face change, just barely, just a fraction, every single morning, was a particular corner on Birchwood Avenue. An older woman kept a garden there. An absolute riot of color no matter the season, because she changed it religiously with whatever was blooming. Sunflowers in late summer, chrysanthemums in the fall, a brave and stubborn row of red tulips that appeared every single April like a small miracle. So Daniel started slowing down there. Every single morning and afternoon, he'd ease off the gas just slightly at that corner and let the bus roll slow so Owen could get a proper look. He never said a word about it. He never made it a thing. He just slowed down. One afternoon, maybe 4 months into this, Owen was climbing down off the bus at his stop. He got to the bottom step and he stopped. He turned back and he looked up at Daniel, and there was a whole, entire question living inside that look, without a single word attached to it. "You slow down there on purpose? You see it too?" And Daniel said, "Easy as breathing. Good garden, huh? I look for it every day. Same as you." Owen nodded. One small, certain nod. And that was the first real conversation they ever had. Not one word of it was spoken out loud. Now, here is where the story begins to acquire its hidden complication. The thing that was moving beneath the surface of all those quiet, ordinary mornings like a current beneath still water. Because what Daniel did not know, what nobody thought to mention to the bus driver, was the precise nature and scale of Owen's mother. Her name was Celeste Calloway, 34 years old, CEO of a technology firm whose name appeared on buildings and endowments and charity galas across the entire state. Widowed, beautiful in the particular way of someone who carries grief with enormous discipline, and almost never lets it show. And for the last 14 months, she had been the target of what could only be described as a patient, organized, and utterly relentless siege, because a young, grieving, brilliant billionaire widow with a small fatherless son is, as it turns out, the most hunted creature walking the earth among a very particular species of ambitious men. They circled her, they maneuvered. They performed being wonderful with children loudly when Celeste was watching and dropped the performance completely the instant she wasn't. They bought Owen expensive gifts he had no interest in. They crouched down to his eye level and called him Buddy and Champ and Little Man in voices that sounded, to anyone paying close enough attention, exactly like what they were. A performance aimed at his mother, not at him. Can you imagine how that felt to a child who had nothing to do all day but watch and listen? Owen despised them. Of course he did. He said nothing about it, because Owen said almost nothing about anything. But he saw everything. Children always do. A child who has gone quiet on the outside does not stop noticing on the inside. If anything, they notice more. And somewhere in the middle of all of this, worn down to absolute bone by the grief and the loneliness and the relentless siege, Celeste had said a thing, half in genuine conviction, half perhaps simply to make the circling stop. She had said it to her board, to her family, to the men themselves, pointedly, when the situation required it, and it had hardened, over time, into a known and settled fact about her. She would not consider marrying again unless it was a man her son chose for himself. Her son, who did not speak, who wanted nothing to do with any one of them. It was an elegant and unanswerable locked door, and every soul in her orbit understood it was a locked door. That was precisely why she had built it. But then something happened that changed everything. The school district's annual charity gala was not, under ordinary circumstances, an event with anything whatsoever to do with Daniel Carr. But the district had recently started a tradition. A handful of staff from each school would attend, teachers, aides, and one bus driver selected, by lottery as a gesture toward celebrating the whole school community. Daniel's name came out of the draw. He nearly didn't go. A ballroom full of wealthy donors was his least favorite imaginable way to spend an evening. He had to find someone to watch Cora, whose one good suit was rented at considerable personal inconvenience. But the principal made it sound as though it mattered. So he went. His plan was simple and complete. Stand near the back, eat a few of the small useless appetizers, smile at no one in particular, and leave the very second it was politely possible to do so. What no one had mentioned to him, what it apparently simply did not occur to anyone to mention to, the bus driver, was that the gala's single largest donor that evening, the woman whose name was printed across half the program, the CEO whose company was personally funding the new school library wing, was Celeste Calloway, Owen's mother. Daniel did not know this. He was standing at the very back of the room, near the service doors, with his sad little plate of unidentifiable appetizers, counting down quietly in his head. He had been there perhaps 40 minutes. He had spoken to almost no one. He was, by every measure, precisely as invisible as he had expected and, frankly, preferred to be. And then the room changed. He felt it before he understood it. The way the sound drops. 300 conversations going quiet in one wave, like a field of candles all guttering at once. The way heads begin to turn in a slow, collective movement toward something happening on the floor. Daniel looked up, and there was Owen Calloway, in a small blazer that fit him perfectly and a serious expression that fit him even better, had stepped away from his mother's side at the front of the room. He was walking, alone, through the middle of that enormous glittering space, in a perfectly straight and certain line, as though he had made a decision and the rest of the world was simply geography to be crossed. He walked past the tables, past the clusters of expensive suits, past every powerful, eligible man who had spent the last year performing warmth at him for his mother's benefit, straight to the back, straight to the service doors, straight to Daniel. It took Daniel a genuinely embarrassing number of seconds to understand. He actually looked behind himself, certain there must be someone else, someone important, someone worthy of being a destination. But there was nothing behind him except a tray of dirty glasses and a closed door. Owen stopped directly in front of him, tipped his head all the way back to look up, and reached up with his small hand and took hold of Daniel's. The entire ballroom held its breath. And then Owen Calloway, in a voice that was clear and steady and certain, the voice of a child who has made up his mind about something completely, said the words that cracked that glittering room straight down the middle. "This is my friend. He sees the garden with me." Daniel stood perfectly still, because he understood, in that exact second, what he was hearing. He understood what those 8 words had cost. He was listening to 14 months of silence break open in a room full of frightening strangers. For him, for the bus driver, because the bus driver had slowed down at a garden on Birchwood Avenue and never once asked for anything in return. He looked up. Celeste Calloway was standing 5 feet away, both hands pressed over her mouth, and the tears were moving freely down her face in front of 300 witnesses. She was hearing her little boy's voice in public for the first time since the day his father died. And then, from somewhere near the stage, a voice, well-intentioned, delighted, completely oblivious to the thing it was about to do, called out across that ringing silence. "Well, Celeste, it appears your son has made his choice." The room laughed, warm, charmed, enchanted. 300 people turning as one creature to look at the rumpled man in the rented suit, standing by the dirty glasses, holding a billionaire's son by the hand. And Daniel felt something cold move through him from the top of his scalp to the soles of his feet, because he knew about the vow. He had heard it the way everyone eventually heard everything, sideways, in pieces, mentioned once by a parent at a bus stop, echoed faintly in the murmuring of the crowd tonight. She would only marry a man her son chose. Everyone in that room knew it. It was common knowledge among anyone who moved in these circles. It was famous, almost, as a locked door, as an elegant and unanswerable never, and the lock had just, in the most spectacular and public way imaginable, apparently been turned. Every man in that room, Daniel understood with a cold and certain clarity, would have stepped forward, the gates of heaven thrown open without warning. A beautiful, brilliant, extraordinary woman and a famous public vow, and a child's open declaration, all of it gift-wrapped in front of 300 witnesses. You would have to be, by every worldly measure, a complete and absolute fool to fumble a thing like that. What she didn't know was what he was about to do. Daniel looked down at Owen, at the serious brown eyes looking back up at him, at the small hand still holding his, and he understood something that perhaps no one else in that enormous room had yet understood. Owen had not crossed that ballroom to choose a stepfather. Owen was 6 years old. Owen did not know about vows or fortunes or the political geography of charity galas. Owen had crossed that ballroom because he had spent 14 months quietly, carefully deciding that Daniel Carr was safe, that Daniel Carr was real, in a room full of performances, that Daniel Carr was, among all the adults who moved through his careful, watchful, silent world, the one who had never once looked at him and seen a problem to be solved or a door to be opened. Owen had crossed that ballroom to claim his friend. That was the whole and complete truth of it, and Daniel would sooner have walked into the sea than allow 300 delighted strangers to twist that pure and holy thing into a fairy tale about marrying his mother before the boy had even let go of his hand. That's when he realized the truth of what he had to do. He thought of Cora, of the mornings she climbed into his car still half asleep, trusting completely, as children trust when they know without having to think about it, that they are safe. He thought of what it would mean to that small boy if the most important thing he had ever done, the bravest thing, the realest thing, was immediately repackaged by a room of adults into something it was never meant to be. He could not do it. He would not. The room was still smiling, still warm, still fully expecting him to step forward and accept his role in the fairy tale that had just written itself. Daniel released Owen's hand, gently, the way you set down something very precious. He bent down, slowly, until he was level with those serious brown eyes. He turned his back to the 300 watching faces, so it was just the two of them, the way it always was in the mornings on the bus. He said, very quietly, just for Owen, "That right there is the bravest thing I have ever seen any person do in my whole life. Thank you for telling all these people that we're friends, because we are friends, and we are always going to be friends." Then he stood up, and he turned to face the room. He looked at Celeste Calloway directly, and he spoke clearly enough that the entire ballroom could hear every single word. "Ma'am, your son is the finest kid on my route. It has been the genuine honor of my year to drive his bus. But I need to say something out loud right now, so that every person in this room hears it plain." He paused. "I am not a prize to be won, and this boy is not a key to a lock. Your son did not choose a husband for you tonight. He chose a friend for himself. That is all he did, and it is a real and beautiful thing, and I will not stand here and let it get turned into something else in front of him." He looked back down at Owen one more time. "Friends don't need a reason, partner, and they sure don't need a reward. I'll see you Monday morning. I'll slow down for the garden." Then he picked up his coat, and he walked out of that ballroom, and he drove home to his daughter. The silence he left behind him lasted a very long time. Celeste stood in the middle of that enormous room, her son's hand in hers now, the tears still wet on her face, and she watched the doors close behind the bus driver, and something shifted in her, quietly, the way real things shift, without announcement, without fanfare, without a room full of witnesses to applaud it. Every man who had ever stood in front of her and performed goodness at her son had done it to get closer to her. This man had walked away from her, in front of 300 people who fully expected him to do the opposite, to protect her son. She had never once, in 2 years of circling suitors and patient performances and carefully managed public appearances, seen anything remotely like it. "Can you imagine," she said quietly, to no one in particular, still watching those closed doors, "what kind of man does that?" Owen looked up at her. He nodded, one small, solemn nod, as if to say, "I can. That is exactly why I walked across the room." She found him on a Wednesday afternoon, not at a gala, not in a boardroom, not anywhere that required an invitation or a rented suit or a practiced smile. She came to Birchwood Avenue, of all places, stood waiting by the curb near the garden corner, dressed in plain clothes, no driver, no assistant, no careful management of the situation. Just Celeste, waiting in the cold afternoon air for a school bus to finish its route. When Daniel stepped down from the bus, she didn't lead with the vow. She didn't lead with the money, or the gala, or the public embarrassment of being the woman who just watched a man walk away from what every person in that room considered the single greatest windfall of the decade. She led with this, quietly. "Thank you for not taking the thing everyone in that room expected you to take. Every other man I have encountered in 2 years would have taken it without a second thought. You are the first person, the first, who looked at my son and did not immediately see a means to get to me." And so they talked, just the two of them, standing at the side of an ordinary road, while the late afternoon went golden around them, the garden blazing its small, brave colors behind its low fence. She told him about her husband, about the long, grinding loneliness of the siege, about how staggering a thing it is to be completely isolated in the precise center of great wealth and influence. He told her about Cora, about Route 7, about the thing you learn after 6 years of reading 40 faces twice a day, that the most important thing one person can do for another is simply to see them, clearly and without agenda, and ask for nothing back. They did not talk about the vow at all. Not once. They were just two tired parents standing at a bus stop, which, underneath every other thing, was exactly and completely what they were. What happened next took time. Real time. The slow, careful, unspectacular kind. Months of ordinary conversations. Slow Saturday mornings where Owen sat between them at a kitchen table and talked. Because Owen was talking now, a little more each week, as though the dam that had broken in that ballroom was still slowly releasing everything stored behind it. Months of Cora and Owen figuring each other out with the pragmatic directness that only children are capable of. Months of Daniel holding very deliberately back, not because he didn't feel what he was beginning to feel, but because he would not, under any circumstances, allow that little boy to attach himself to something that might still fall apart and break him. He had spent 14 months making sure Owen felt safe on a bus. He was not about to make the rest of the boy's childhood feel unsafe instead. Celeste understood this without being told. It was, she said later, the thing that made her certain. Not the walk out of the gala, not the speech, but the months afterward, when there was no audience and no performance possible. And Daniel Carr was simply, consistently, in every small and unremarkable way, exactly who he had always been. They were married 14 months after that Wednesday on Birchwood Avenue. Small ceremony. Backyard. Bright afternoon in early June. The kind of day that seems lit from somewhere inside itself. Owen talked the entire day, start to finish. Turns out that once the silence finally broke, there were 14 months of saved-up words waiting on the other side of it, and they have not really stopped since. Cora, who had regarded her new stepbrother with initial skepticism, and had arrived at total devotion somewhere around month 3, served as the person who handed out the flowers, which she did with enormous self-importance and considerable flair. And there was a dog there, too. Of course there was. Owen had wanted a dog for as long as Daniel had known him. A real one, not a borrowed glimpse through a garden fence. They'd gotten him one 3 months earlier. A big, ridiculous, joyful rescue, with ears that went in 2 different directions, and no apparent understanding of how large he was. Owen had named him Birch, after the street where everything started. Daniel still drives Route 7 to this day. People ask him why. The gentle, polite version of, "You don't need to anymore," and he understands what they mean. He does. The financial reality of his life changed in ways that still occasionally make him stop and need a quiet moment. But he thinks about 41 faces climbing up his steps every morning. He thinks about how many of them are carrying things far too heavy for their small shoulders. He thinks about how most of them have people in their lives anxiously trying to fix them and not nearly enough people simply willing to see them. And he thinks that this specific thing, this job, this 40-second window twice a day, might be one of the most important things a person can do. Good morning. Good to see you. 4 words. An open door. No agenda. A child who has been truly seen, simply seen, asked nothing in return, left to be exactly who they are. That child carries that forward. For years. For a lifetime. Into ballrooms and bus stops and the long ordinary terrain of their whole lives ahead. Owen taught him that. A quiet little boy in the 3rd row, watching a garden go past through a window, taught him that being seen is not a small thing at all. It might, in fact, be the biggest thing there is. The night of the gala, when Daniel got home and Cora was still up past her bedtime demanding to know how the big fancy party had been, he sat down on the edge of her bed and thought about a little boy walking alone across an enormous room. Something happened, he told her. The bravest kid I know used his words tonight. She didn't know what he meant. She does now. She has a brother who fills every room he walks into with words and noise and questions and laughter. She has a mother who stopped being a CEO for a few hours every morning to sit at a kitchen table and be ordinary. She has a ridiculous dog named Birch who knocks things off surfaces and believes, firmly and without evidence, that he is a lapdog. And every morning, without fail, her dad climbs into a school bus and drives his route. Because a ballroom full of 300 powerful people could not see one bus driver standing right in front of them. And a silent little boy crossed that whole enormous room, past every last one of them, to take his hand. Because the bus driver had slowed down for the garden. Because he had seen him. And that, in the end, turned out to be the only thing that ever truly mattered. That's the whole story. That's all it ever was. And I want to ask you just one thing before you go. Who is the person in your life who truly saw you, back when you felt completely invisible to everyone else in the world? Who slowed down for your garden without making it a thing? Have you ever told them what it meant? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. And if this story landed somewhere real for you tonight, if you believe, and the way I've come to believe it right down to my bones, that the rarest thing one person can do for you is simply to see them and ask for nothing back, then hit that subscribe button. Drop a like so the next person finds their way here too. I'll see you in the very next one.